And there we go. We are recording. Okay, so welcome back, guys, to the Hot Mess Medium Show. Almost forgot the name of this podcast. Today, I have a special guest for you, Laura Walton, my friend and past student. Laura, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes. We were just we were just kind of going over what we should be talking about, and then she was about to tell a very interesting story, so I stopped her and said, let's go ahead and hit record and just see what happens and where this goes. So we will get into that, but first I would love, Laura, if you can introduce yourself. I know that's kind of like a loaded thing. I don't know about you, my mind goes blank when someone asks me, so who are you? Tell us about you. But go for it. I would love yeah, I'd love if you could share about you.
Okay, yeah, it is always a hard question to answer. Who am I? How do you summarize that in one or two sentences? But yeah, so I'm trained as a mental health therapist. I've been primarily working with grief and death and trauma within my mental health practice, but I've also in the last couple of years been focusing more on shifting out of the mental health realm and focusing more on in various ways just trying to broaden my reach and my ability to work with people in different ways through the lens of grief, so support through grief in a lot of different ways, but not limited to the box of mental health or therapy more specifically.
I love that. I'm so curious, like when you're sharing that, a question kind of came to me. Like, what sort of sparked that for you? What sparked your desire to kind of shift past the mental health realm and more into this area that you're going?
Yeah, well, I think I've felt sort of trapped in a box of now I won't say mental health, but I'll say more so therapy because
Okay.
it's a licensed profession, which is good in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. But with that also comes a lot of rules and regulations and structure around what you are quote unquote supposed to do or not supposed to do. And when you're working as a therapist, oftentimes it's one on one, and there's only so many hours in a day that well, there's only so many hours in a day, period. But then there's only so many hours in a day where I have the capacity to be working one on one. So I have felt that um, my abilities and the options I have available to me have been limited through the rules and regulation side and just through the timing side and my ability to um, work with people has felt like it's gotten limited, and in a lot of ways I've sort of outgrown that. So just starting to feel that has been, I think, the initial driving force, at least in figuring out what other ways are there in which I can still work with grief within a topic and context that is very personal to me and that I'm very passionate about, but not feel so limited in what I can and cannot do.
Absolutely. I love this so much. What this reminds me of is like this is new earth. Like this is like where we're going, right?
Mhm.
Pushing past those limitations, kind of breaking those barriers, taking yourself out of boxes and kind of creating this new way of thinking, of doing things, of supporting people. And when people have that inner driving force to do things like that, like you, um, it means to me anyways that you're so destined for doing that, right, for paving that path for these new ways of healing and supporting people, and it means that it's needed. That's like what's so important. It means that it's needed. Your work is needed. So I love that you shared that. That's so awesome. And I've been seeing that a lot, specifically with like mental health workers and therapists and, of all kinds, starting to tap into their mediumship abilities or their intuitive abilities, or incorporating more healing modalities into their practice. Again, kind of stretching those barriers and things like that. So that's really, really cool. Um,
Thank you.
and then, so you had mentioned that you had your own sort of experiences that um, led to this as well, right? Your own experiences with grief and stuff. So I'd love if you can share a little bit more on that, if you feel comfortable with that, of course.
Yeah. So in my 20s, my world kind of got rocked by death and grief unexpectedly. When I was 21, my dad committed suicide, and then when I was 26, the person who was my boyfriend slash best friend in the world died of a drug overdose. And so both of those things just kind of shattered the reality of the world that I had known, a world in which, death only happens to other people, until it
Of
happens to
course.
you. Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
but really the reality that I had known, and I was so young that I was kind of alone in it, and that I didn't know many other people of my peers who had experienced those types of deaths. So I found myself just navigating this world that I was not prepared for and could not find the support to figure out how to navigate it. So seeing that lacking was what was my initial inspiration and motivation to go to grad school, become a therapist, and start down the path of this work. But what has continued my interest in this, as many years have now gone by, is just seeing how, well, I might say two things. One is just seeing how still um, poorly equipped for death we are, which I always find ironic given the fact that it's going to happen to all of us. Like, why do we avoid this so much? Um, how poorly equipped for death we are, and how misunderstood then death in some ways and grief are. And then also this fascination with the other side and spirit world and all of that. Those two pieces are what I think has kept me involved in this work.
I love that. And I so hear you and totally agree. Even as a medium, like literally talking to spirit for a living, um, that could not have prepared me for dealing with grief and losing someone so close to me.
Mhm.
So I can only imagine, I can't even imagine just what you would have experienced, you know, in your first few experiences with loss in such a traumatic way, and not
Mhm.
having those tools, and not having anyone around who can kind of relate to that, or who could offer support, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I love that you were able to kind of take what life had given you and do something with it that you knew, like, okay, this is what's missing. I'm going to fill in this gap, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to support people um, in the way that I needed support, type of thing.
Yeah.
So that's really incredible. And thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Um, and you had mentioned that curiosity with, life after death and the other
Mhm.
side. And I'm so curious now, because I love asking anyone who comes on here, like, if you've had any personal experiences with the spirit world, like, maybe
Mhm.
with your past loved ones. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Yes, I have. And that you'll get more in depth in that in a second. But one of the first ways that I remember kind of coping with the deaths when they happened was f- trying to figure out where they were. I wasn't raised with any religion, so I didn't come into this having any particular belief system about what happens when we die. And so when that happened, when people died, I found myself like, wait, but where are they? and just really trying to like wrap my head around figuring this out. So I read a lot of books. I remember just spending a lot of time, and this was in the early 2000s. So we didn't have as many online resources available, but spending a lot of time in Barnes and Noble, just standing in the it must have been like the self-help or spirituality section or something, standing in that section, just poring over books with tears pouring down my face and just trying to find some answers or some direction somewhere. So through all of the things I read and information I absorbed, I think I kind of just cobbled together my own belief system and understanding of what death was and what happened and where my people were who had now died. Um, so maybe that contributed to a little bit of this, but I do remember well, not even pretty soon, like immediately. Actually, rewind for a second. The day, so I had a I was much closer to the boyfriend who died than my dad. So we had a better relationship. So that death was harder for me than my dad's death was. And I even remember the day, so he wouldn't die until late that night, but the day of his death when he was still alive, I felt so weird. This I've
Ooh.
never before or since had anything like this experience happen to me, but I just felt like something was terribly wrong. I felt something was off in my body. I just felt so weird, but I had no context for it and no words for it. I didn't know what was going on. And of course, at the time, there was nothing abnormal about that day. Um, but then in hindsight, when, early the next morning when I learned he died, then I looked at it through a different lens and was like, it was there. The way I've come to understand that, what it means to me is that there was some connection there between us, and his soul knew that it on some level that it was preparing to leave, and I felt that, and I knew
Ooh.
something was going on there before it even happened, which is crazy to even say out loud.
I have chills as you're talking about it. That is
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. So, I hadn't even necessarily thought about that before in this context, but and then immediately after his death, for the immediate days, weeks, months, even following, there were just so many things that happened just as far as electricity, like lights going on and off, phones ringing, nobody was there, just all of these things that happened, that the way I made sense of that through what I read and through other stories from other people was his energy just trying to communicate in some way, make its presence known. And it was loud for a while. Um, it did quiet down eventually, but that I think for me planted the seeds of being able to even consider this, because if you had told this to me 25 years ago, I'd been like, you're a crazy person. And I would not have even considered this possibility or considered that I'd be sitting here having this conversation. Like this wasn't a possibility. So I think just experiencing what I experienced laid the groundwork maybe for this being possible in my realm of possibility. Um, and then I did start to actually be able to feel his presence at certain times. I remember I was driving once and I just knew he was in my passenger seat. I could just feel this kind of like tug on my energy over there. And I was like, hey, looked over and just said hi to him. And it just he was just there. As crazy as that might sound.
Not crazy at all, especially look who you're saying this to. Yeah, no, that does not surprise me one bit, but I think it's so important to share stuff like that, especially specific examples that people can put themselves in your shoes. It really helps them to kind of think back at moments where they had those similar experiences,
Mhm.
but then
Yeah.
they thought that they were crazy or they're just making it up because it feels like you're making it up, right?
Yeah.
It just feels
Mhm.
so natural. Just like
Yeah.
how you were saying, like, I just knew. Like, there's no
Yeah.
way to describe it. I just knew, or you just felt it. And it was this weird, natural, like, oh, hi, you're there. I definitely relate to that when it comes to my grandmother. This is like the second big loss that I've experienced. Although this one hit significantly harder than the loss of my grandfather, I'm talking about my the loss of my grandmother, of course. And
Mhm.
I'm having such similar experiences with her where I just feel her all the time. I
Yeah.
hear her talking in my mind.
Mm.
I feel her with me, and I talk to her as if she's right beside me, and it feels so natural. But then the human part of me will be, even though I'm a medium, the human
Yeah.
part of me will be like, how do you know that's real?
Mhm.
What if you were just making that up? Or there's this moment where I was making her cabbage rolls for Christmas. I was using her recipe, and it was our first Christmas without her, and I could feel her with me. And when I was all done, oh, I'm getting emotional. When I was all done, I heard her say in my mind, like, I'm proud of you, my girl. Like, you did a good job. And I
Mm.
started crying and sobbing. And I'm like, did I just make that up or did I really hear her? But no, it made me so emotional. And I just, the medium in me was like, no, that was her. That was real.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask you a question?
Oh my God. Yeah, go for it.
How do you feel it? Or is like, what does that feel like to you? Of
That's so funny. I was literally going to ask you that question.
course you were.
We're very in tune right now. Yeah, what does that feel like? So I think it's different for everyone, but when I feel a spirit in my energy, it's like, I'm very in tune with my energy field, right? That extension of your spirit that surrounds you. I'm in tune with mine, meaning it's very sensitive. I could feel when something crosses it that you can't see with your physical eyes, right? So for me, it's like I could feel this slight change of pressure. It's so ever slight that this, yeah, this like pressure change, um, temperature change, like it's just this, oh, there's something in my energy field that wasn't there before,
Hmm.
right? And then from there, I'm able to use all of my senses to kind of become aware of, well, what is it, right? I get curious, and sometimes it's just this inner knowing that drops in, like it just plop, like in my brain,
Yeah.
that like,
Yeah.
oh, like, or this will feel very familiar, right? Sometimes, like, and that's what it sounds like. Ooh, I got chills.
Hmm.
Ah, so cold. That's what it sounds like. Or that's what sounds like that. Why can't I use my words right now? Grandma, you're too close to me right now. She wasn't good with her words. Anyways, it sounds like that's what happened when when you felt your boyfriend sitting next to you in the passenger seat. It was just
Hmm.
so natural and familiar, right? Their energy is so familiar. It feels like home, or it feels
Hmm.
like, I don't know. So,
Ah, yeah. I hadn't thought about this in that context before, but that is a good point because it's been so long. Now it's been 18 years since he died. So his energy in death is more familiar to me than his energy in life. But I think what you're saying is at the time, his energy in life was so familiar to me that I knew what that felt like. Right. Yeah. I
yes,
think that is a part of it is that this felt familiar then. And then that's just something that I've forgotten that that's what it was like in life, but it
yes,
still feels familiar. And that's
yeah.
how I know yeah, that's interesting. And for me, it feels like it's interesting because it's always to my right. The energy is always to my right, like
Oh,
up a little bit. Um,
that's
and it's
so,
interesting.
yeah, I was gonna
Go
say
ahead.
that's so
Yeah.
interesting, but also really quick side note, when you were practicing mediumship, were you able to, was that something that showed up for you when you were practicing on sitters? Like, were you able to see or know where the spirit was, on like on which side they were on? I know that's such a weird
Yeah,
question.
I don't if it did, I wasn't paying close attention to it because that doesn't stand out to me. with other
Okay.
people's energy. But
Right.
maybe I just didn't tune into that enough. It could be
Okay.
possible.
Yeah, so typically, like, let's say if I'm like, this doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes if I see that the loved one kind of standing behind the sitter or like my client, I'll see, like, let's say they'll be on the right side, which to me means the paternal side. Or if they're
Mhm.
on the left side, that means maternal. And sometimes if they're up higher, that would mean, okay, parent or grandparent, you know what I mean? Like their position sometimes determines their position in
Yeah,
life or,
yeah.
in family, that sort of thing. So I thought that was interesting, you
Mhm,
mentioning that he's always on your right.
mhm.
Huh,
Well, I know that, yeah, the right is masculine,
masculine.
symbolic of that. So I've thought about it in that context before, but
That
yeah,
makes
it's
sense.
always to the right. It's always like slightly up, and it feels like a tugging, like a pulling of my attention, kind of.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
and then it's just a knowing, like what you said, like which is hard to try to describe, or and it's easy to doubt, you know.
Yes, I know.
Uh, but it's just but there is also a clear and distinct difference for me in when I just know something to be true, as opposed to when I'm, like, hopeful that something's true,
Mm.
or when I'm fearful that something's true, or when I'm trying to control something to be a certain way. Like, those things, I'm super clear on what those things feel like in contrast to what just feels true to me. Um and his presence just feels true to me.
Ooh, okay. I love how you broke that down because as you're saying that, I can also picture that, like what those different things feel like for me.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's such a good thing for everyone to get familiar with.
Yeah.
Like to kind of, and how to do that? Well, think back at times, right? Think back at times where you can kind of connect those dots for yourself.
Yeah.
And for me, like I feel things in my gut. So I don't know about you, but it's like if something is true, it feels so solid and grounded in my gut.
Mhm.
Um, and then it's weird. Like if there's, as soon as you said hopeful, it's like lifted from my gut. It's so
Mhm.
weird how I
Mhm.
can kind of gauge it like in my body. And I know
Yeah.
it's so different for everyone, but I think, like people are going to listen to this and be like, oh, and maybe be more mindful of it or start
Yeah.
noticing it and connecting those dots. So yeah, that was like really valuable.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm glad, and I personally think that is, like, as you said, everybody's different. The way these things translate in our bodies feels different,
Yes.
but I think that that's maybe I could go so far as to say, like, the first key or the first step in starting to be able to understand this connection, whatever this connection is for you. You have to know how different things translate into your body in order to be able to feel that connection with spirit, but also with anything else.
Right. Yeah. With spirit, but also even just intuitively in your day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
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 Super, super important. I love that so much.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So we talked about your experiences with spirit. Oh, well, okay. I was trying to think like where to go from here, but um let's go back a little bit to grief.
Mhm.
And what are some of the ways that you still kind of keep that connection going with your loved ones in spirit? Or like whether it's personal or like maybe some of the work that you've done with clients, like how, like, yeah, anyways, go ahead, share.
Go ahead, share. Um,
I'm struggling to formulate the question, but I think you know what I'm trying to say, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Um, For me at this point, per for my personal experience and connection, it's just, it's been 18 years and like 21 years since the deaths happened, something like that. So it's just been so long that that connection and that energy just feel it's like, it's almost like asking me, like, "How do you remember to breathe every day?"
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just like it's just like a part of what I do, it's a part of
Right.
my day. It's just feeling that connect, although, I mean, I wanna be clear, I don't always feel that connection. It's not always there, and it has changed over the years, and I think gotten a little quieter and softer over the years, but it's been enough that it's, um laid the groundwork, I think, for this, like, ongoing knowing and understanding of that connection being there in some form or another, now and forever.
Right.
Um, so I just, like, kind of know that to be true for me now. Um, Now I'm forgetting what your question was, and if
That's
that
okay.
even answers it.
I think it does. I think it does. Um, I like the part where you're mentioning how those connections change and evolve over time.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
feel like that is how it's meant to be. And it doesn't mean that you are forgetting about them or they're
Mhm.
not as important or, whatever it is. Because I think sometimes people hold on so tight because they're so afraid of what it means if they start to let go and they start to
Yeah.
move forward. Right.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's important to know that it is actually okay and it doesn't mean anything bad if that connection does it's not as present or um it's not taking up so much space in your energy, right,
Yeah.
over the years. It's a sign that you are growing and evolving and changing and healing, which is a very beautiful thing, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I once did this. There was a period of time where I was doing these sessions with a woman who called herself a medical medium, I think.
Oh.
It was a very interesting experience, but at this point, I'll say maybe it had been, I'm just picking a number, but let's say like 12 years or 13 years or something since my boyfriend had died. Um, 12 years maybe. And she said something that I had never even considered as being a possibility, and the kind of like it literally took my breath away, but she said that he was preparing to enter into a new life or something like that. Like he had in
Ooh.
however many years had passed yet, 12 years, he hadn't yet done that. But now he felt ready to do that and was preparing to do that. And I was like, holy shit, that wasn't part of my plan. What does that mean? Um, uh, like that's not how I had anticipated things would go. But then
Right.
starting to think about, but okay, so what if that is a part of what happens? And so he enters into another life. I even asked her, so what does that mean for the connection that I've had with him thus far? Will it become less if he's busy living a life? And she, I don't remember exactly what she said, but something like, yes, in some ways, yes. He will always have in his new life, he'll always have an affinity for the time period that you knew each other. So always be like really interested in that time. I'm like, that's interesting, to think about the time periods historically that I'm interested in. But anyway, that possibility of somebody who we've loved entering into a new life and what that means for our connection with them was a new thing for me to consider and think about at that time, and has been something I've continued to kind of try to wrap my mind around what that means and how that connection still maintains if they are in a new life. I'm curious for you, is that something you've in your conversations with the other side, is that something that's come up for you before?
For sure. Definitely something that I've been so curious about on my mediumship development journey. And, you know, and like as a human, you're just so, well, we're curious, right? We're naturally very curious, but also yeah, like for a long time I tried to figure out like how does that work? But basically, you know, we have our soul and we have our spirit. And so you would still have a connection with the spirit of who he was in that lifetime, that connection you had with him, but his soul would be in a new body. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, that's the way that, so far, anyways, on my journey that I've come to understand it is like the layers of the soul and the
Hmm.
spirit, and how obviously there's so much more that we can't even begin to understand as humans, right? Until we get to the other side, and then we kind of know how everything works. But yeah, that's the way that I understand it, is like
Hmm.
it's like the spirit is a layer over top of the soul. And so
Hmm.
you're still always going to have that connection with the spirit, but yeah, the soul has the ability to reincarnate still.
Hmm.
So it's not like you're losing him forever, or like your loved one forever type of thing. Because the spirit, I feel like, is what encompasses their personality, their characteristics, their experiences, everything that they learned in the lifetime that they had, right?
Yeah.
So, like you, Laura, the spirit within you is going to contain everything from this lifetime. Um, and that energy is never going to die. That,
Hmm.
like, the essence of your spirit is never going to die. It's never going to be destroyed. It's always going to be, but your soul will continue to reincarnate in different lifetimes.
Hmm.
And yeah, anyways, this is like, I don't know if any of that makes sense or
Yeah, it does. And you know what I was sort of, and I don't know that this is right or wrong, but what I was sort of thinking as you said that was the spirit being maybe a part of um like the greater just consciousness that that is the connection of all of us, and the soul being kind of what brings the life into a human form or an animal or a being or whatever, that is
right.
still always connected to the spirit and the greater consciousness, but is also having a human experience. Uh,
Yes.
Again, I
Yes.
just came up with that. I don't know if that's right
I
or not.
know. Yes, because the soul is so if you think of like God, like greater consciousness, the creator, just picture it being this like ball of light, and then us being the little seedlings that kind of separate, right? That's
Mhm.
your soul that's just kind of like separating and having a human experience, that sort of thing. I don't know, that's the way I've always pictured it in my
Yeah.
brain. And which is interesting because I see it as the egg, like an egg, like inside of a woman, and then the little seeds, kind of like little sperms. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, it's just
Yeah.
interesting when you think of creation and the creator and
Yeah.
how it's all connected. So I don't know. That's how I see it in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is really interesting. And I guess if I look at it through that lens, that would make sense too, as time has passed, how the like at one point, the connection that I felt with these people was right there, right in my face, and how that it's gotten more subtle, it's gotten more quiet. And so, but still there, but in a different way. And
Right.
maybe that points to what we're talking about here is that's more the connection to their spirit, but their soul maybe doing something else right now.
It's very possible. This
Hmm.
is something I definitely want to like sit with spirit and kind of see what comes up. It
Yeah.
makes me very curious to know more. I feel like so much of my mediumship development journey has been focused on learning the ins and outs of evidential mediumship, like the
Mhm.
action of doing that and serving in that way, but
Mhm.
so little has actually been focused on learning the ins and outs of the spirit world and
Mhm.
how things work beyond the veil and all of that. Like obviously I have I have knowledge and experience with it, but just not like there's certain questions I have that I didn't realize I had until
Yeah.
I kind of have conversations like this where I'm like, wow, I would really love to sit with spirit and learn more. So you've
Yeah.
inspired me with this,
Oh,
and I'll have to update people with my findings as as I
yes.
start,
Mhm.
actually sitting with spirit and yeah, learning more. But that leads me to wanting to ask you the story you were going to share before I cut you off so that I could hit
Mhm.
record. I would love
Mhm.
to hear what you were going to share.
Mhm. Yeah, well, so there was another student who was in the mediumship training that I had done with you, um, and we had partnered up during that, I think, to do a few, like, practice exercises, so I knew her a little, but I wasn't, like, friends with her. We became friends on social media, but that was it, and then a couple years and then that class ended, and then a couple years passed, and nothing happened, and then around this time last year, I was just feeling this crazy sense of urgency that I needed to reach out to her and get a medium reading with her. Like specifically, I needed to get this reading. And I didn't do like I had this thought a few times. I didn't do it because I was busy or whatever. And then but then I kept it got to a point where every time I was looking at social media, a post of hers was what the first thing that I was seeing. So I eventually just reached out and got the medium reading with her. But at the time, it didn't make sense. I didn't know who was coming through. I didn't know what it was about. It didn't give me any clarity, especially given the fact that I had felt such urgency to get this reading. But I kind of just forgot about it for a few days, but about a week after the reading, the person who came through died. So that means that he had come through when he was still alive. But his death was nearing. And then there was an accident. Actually, yeah, there was an accident. He was in a coma for a couple days before he died. And so on the night of the accident, when I was laying awake, just tossing and turning, it just connected that and I had that drop in, like, knowing you were talking about, and I was just like, "That was him." I just knew it all made sense in the context of this person, but I hadn't obviously thought about him because he was still alive at the time. So, that started kind of this ongoing throughout almost all of last year conversation. I did, and then I also coordinated a couple readings with her with his various family members. But so this kind of ongoing, evolving conversation through her with him over the majority of last year, which was just really crazy to experience that on so many different levels with somebody coming through before they died and then like this evolving thing was really cool.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so when they had come through, they weren't in a coma, they didn't have Alzheimer's, like there
Mm-mm.
wasn't anything like
Mm-mm.
that.
No, and it was somebody
Wow.
young, so it was an accident, that's why he died, he wasn't sick. Um, so when he came through, it was about I don't remember exactly how many days, but a week, um, maybe a couple days less than a week, but about a week before the accident. And then the accident happened, and then there were 2 days while he was alive in a coma, and then died.
Wow.
Mhm. Yes.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I don't even know what to say because it's so like I've had experiences where I'm doing a reading for someone and someone like the information coming through resemble like it's talking about someone who's living
Yeah.
but usually, like typically, it's another loved one kind of bringing that information forward. So it's like
Mhm.
I don't realize until after that, they're like, oh, well, that all resonates with this one person, but they're still alive. So to me, in my mind, I'm like, oh, that means that someone else is bringing that information forward. But I'm so, anything is possible,
Yeah. Well,
honestly.
it's interesting because I remember asking you this or having this conversation at some point when I was doing the training with you about this topic of people coming through while they're still alive. And
Yes.
the I think from how I remember, at least the answers you had based off of what your experiences were that people who were like in comas or
Mhm.
who were terminally ill,
Mhm.
um, or maybe very old, like that had
Yes.
been the experience, and that those people who were kind of had one foot, one foot in this world, one foot out already, w- that had come through.
Right.
But even that, though, being planted as a seed of possibility when somebody's technically still alive, and I think in hindsight, paired with the experience of mine that I was talking about earlier, where I felt so weird that day of the death, although at that point nothing had happened, like,
Right.
kind of pulling from that, like, I think made me even able to consider the possibility of this being him that had come through before he died. I mean, it did feel so, so true to me, and everything she said applied directly to him. Um,
That's insane.
but without having had these experiences and conversations with you, like I might have also just been like, yeah, but you're crazy and dismissed
Right.
that, you know.
Yes.
Um, but because these seeds had been planted, I think that made space for the possibility of it, and I was like, Okay,
Yeah.
but what if?" But just what if this were
Oh,
possible?
yeah,
And considering
for
it from
sure.
that lens, and I mean, I know from my experience and the people I've worked with experiences and working with grief, like, choosing that over choosing, "No, you're the crazy person," makes surviving without your person, in my experience, so much more manageable. Um,
Absolutely.
that's the road. If I have to live the rest of my life without this person, I'm gonna choose to live it in a world where I get to believe that there's still some something there, some kind of connection, as opposed to believing I'm crazy. Um,
Yes. Not even just so, like, even just to add to that, there's also this whole other area of belief where, specifically, those who are very religious, they believe that once you pass, like, you go back to, God, and you do not ever connect with your loved one.
mhm.
Any love, you know what I mean? Like, there's no more connection, you don't hear from them anymore. And so that's like a whole other belief too.
Yeah.
Um where, so again, for me, and like what you were saying, I could not live knowing that. I don't know. That's not, like, for me personally, that's just not something that feels, that's not a supportive belief, or like,
Mhm.
it just can't, it doesn't feel true to me at all. Not only because I couldn't imagine spending the rest of my life just not having that connection with them while they're on the other side, but also there's just so much evidence that shows that they are still around, and they are, you know what I mean? Like, I've had so many personal experiences where they're definitely still around, and
Yeah.
they're, trying to communicate with us, and they're sending us signs, and they're, things like that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. That's incredible.
Mhm.
um I just thought of one experience I had that I still can't quite explain, was a little bit similar, where I was doing a reading for a client, and this man came through who had a stroke, but he survived the stroke, and he was okay after. And I had described this gentleman and it sounded like someone who was still living to the sitter. And I think it was like a few weeks later, this actually happened to that man. He ended
Mm,
up having a stroke right before, I think it was her daughter who got married, like right before the wedding. But he ended up surviving it and he was okay after that. And
mm,
that always, so that's what that made me think of. Like, with you sharing your story, it made me think of that situation where I kind of couldn't wrap my head around it. Well, how is this possible? How was it that he had come through before he had a stroke, kind of warning that he was going to have one, but that he would be okay, so that everyone knew that he would be
yeah,
okay, right?
yeah,
There's just still so many questions, but I guess that
yeah.
is what happens when you're human. And
Mhm. Yeah. And I think there's a lot that we just can't wrap our human brains around, and that we try to fit into the context of the stories we know or we've been taught, and they don't
yes,
fit. Um, but uh, yeah, so I think just and I know it's hard to do, but having the suggestions of these different possibilities and considering that. And I don't think, with different religious or cultural viewpoints or whatever, it might be that believe these certain things. That I think that's fine if that's what you want to believe. But
yep,
I think what's more important is that is recognizing that you can make the choice in doing that, and believing in subscribing to that belief, whatever it is. Like if it's something like if it's a religious belief or something that you're raised with, but then
mhm,
something happens that maybe rocks that viewpoint, you do have the choice to reconsider if this is still true for you or not true for you. And either way is fine, I think, whichever choice we make. But anyway, I think we can get so stuck in the stories we've we've tied ourselves to that sometimes it doesn't leave room for these areas of possibility that can be so like earth shattering.
absolutely. And you said that so beautifully, by the way. Like, I just love listening to you talk. You said that so beautifully because it's so true. I know I mentioned, like, you know, some people choose to believe because of their religious beliefs that,
Mhm.
our loved ones go somewhere and then they're never to be heard from again. And, but like maybe for someone, if that is their way of coping with grief, then who am I to say that that's wrong?
Yeah,
Right? If that's
yeah,
what feels most supportive and nourishing for them, then that's
yeah,
perfect for them.
yeah,
For me, and then I have my beliefs that feel so supportive and nourishing for me. So I really love that you added that part, because I think that's a really important reminder for me too, that everyone's going to have their own ways of coping and all of
yeah,
that.
yeah. I think, yeah. And we get to choose what feels supportive and nourishing for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, this was such a good conversation. Before we kind of wrap this up, I would love if there's anything, because you're super intuitive. I was wondering if there's anything you feel called to share, like just like a message, like maybe someone needs to hear it. Not to put any pressure on you, but don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Like, is there just something on your heart that you could share?
Mm, hold on. Trust the process. That's what's coming. Trust the process, which I need to heed that advice. Maybe it's for me. But also maybe for somebody else too.
I love that. I think that's the perfect message.
Hmm.
Because it's something that's hard to do, right?
Yeah,
And even just like connecting that to our conversation about grief, that's that's a really hard one to trust, right?
it's hard.
That whole
It's
process.
so hard.
Oh,
I still
be,
battle that daily.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's like not linear.
Hmm.
It's kind of a hot mess. It's a roller coaster. Some
Hmm.
days you're totally fine. Other days you feel like you've been hit by a train.
Hmm.
Um, because you feel them. And I actually started to wonder if the days where I am just a sobbing mess out of nowhere is because I feel her closest to me.
Maybe.
Oh, I got chills.
I know, but it's just a shift there in perspective, right? But what if that were
Yeah,
true? That would
right.
change things for you, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the days where I just like can't get her off my mind, or I'm flooded with memories, or
Mhm.
whatever it is, I'm more emotional about it. I
Mhm.
started to wonder, like, it's got to be because she's just like so close by. Like she's
Yeah.
right there. So of course I'm feeling her. Of course I'm overwhelmed with emotions because I'm
Yeah.
missing her.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Ooh, I like that. I love that shift.
yes, yes, maybe someone needed to hear that too.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, it has been a pleasure. I feel like this was such a nourishing conversation, and I feel like there's so many good golden nuggets in here that are going to be really supportive for my listeners. So, can you actually let my listeners know how they can connect with you? Like, what
Yes.
sort of offerings do you have? Tell us about it.
Yes. So my business that is not therapy, it is now called Grief on Purpose. So I have a website that's griefonpurpose.com, Instagram grief dot on dot purpose, and Facebook. My current offerings are I have some grief courses and journals that I've created that have all been inspired by over a decade of work as a therapist and just kind of tackling the common questions and misunderstandings that come up. So these are designed to be really supportive of people, but for people who are maybe not going to go to therapy for whatever reason, but still want to um, do some work, and learn more about themselves and learn more about their grief. So I have those available. I'm working on writing a book about yoga and grief and the integration of those two. So that's probably still a year plus out from publication, but that's in the works. And um, at this moment, I'm trusting the process and just kind of
Love it.
sitting with how I don't know exactly how this grief work that's not confined in the box of therapy, how that's going to fully evolve. But I'm letting that percolate and seeing what comes from that.
I love that. Is there anything else? Is there anything else? I'm just trying to think. No, okay. You mentioned, do you have
Yes,
a YouTube channel?
I don't have a YouTube channel. No, maybe
May
someday. No,
maybe someday, because that's
Mhm.
what I was feeling was missing.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
apparently it doesn't exist yet. But maybe it
It
will
doesn't.
someday.
It doesn't, but I think I might be starting a podcast. But maybe the
Okay.
YouTube that ties into the YouTube channel.
Yes.
I need to get some more stories to include in the book that I'm writing, and I'm thinking about doing that through podcast form, but then seeing how that podcast evolves into maybe something greater. Um
I
so
love
that's
that.
maybe where you're picking up on YouTube.
Probably,
Hmm.
probably.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. And thank you to all of our listeners for, tuning in today. If you want to, or if you have any questions, definitely drop them below or below. Oh my God. Well, yeah, in the episode, Spotify, anyways, has like a question box now. Or, send a message to me or Laura. Go follow her.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.